Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sustainability Talks. I'm your host, Patrick Sheehan, Managing Partner at ETF Partners. ETF Partners is Europe's oldest and leading venture capital firm focused on backing businesses that deliver what we call sustainability through innovation. So who am I and what do we actually do at ETF? Well, we started ETF over 15 years ago because we wanted to show the world that we could use venture capital techniques to address real-world problems, particularly within the realm of environment and sustainability. ETF was one of the first companies to do this in Europe, and as such, change has been at the core of our DNA. So we invest in change, and the founders we back are the innovators working to drive positive change. As for myself, I'm originally from the UK, as you can probably tell, but I've actually lived all over the world, from Europe to Silicon Valley and back again. But in 2006, alongside Peter Horsburgh, the pair of us founded ETF Partners because we're firm believers that profit and purpose go hand in hand. And today, as we grapple with a world that seems increasingly fraught with risk, our work as enablers of change and the work of our founders has never felt more necessary. So today, we're thrilled to have you with us as we launch our inaugural podcast, and we can't wait for you to listen. The Sustainability Talks podcast is not just another podcast, at least that's our goal. We're aiming to create a space to explore the big questions related to sustainability, to innovation, and to making positive environmental and societal impact. In this first episode, we'll be speaking with Lord John Browne, the ex-CEO of BP, to discuss the future of energy in a world going digital. Hi, welcome everybody. I'm joined by my colleague Rob Genieser. And of course, we're both delighted to be joined by Lord Browne, John Browne, former CEO of BP, among many other things. And we're talking about a topic we think is really important for the world, the future of energy in a world going digital. And John, I'm going to give just a short background without going over the top. Just I think everyone knows your background in BP. They perhaps don't know you've also served on the boards of Goldman Sachs, Intel, Daimler-Benz. You're in the House of Lords. You're actually on the boards of many small technology companies as well now. So it's actually just a kind of fascinating range of things that you've done. I'm intrigued though that I think you have 17 doctorates that you've collected from around the world. So is this a world record?
Well, good afternoon. It absolutely isn't a world record. I know of at least one person who's almost got double the number, I would say. I'm not sure that it's... I'm very privileged to have these, and I'm very happy with all the associations I've made, and actually I still keep up.
Very good. And I want to start off chatting to you that moment. I think you were in Stanford, standing up in front of a crowded audience as chief executive, relatively recent chief executive of BP, one of the world's largest oil companies, when you started to talk about climate change and when you introduced the idea of beyond petroleum. Can you just take us back to that moment? Why did you do it?
So I gave that speech in 1997 at Stanford University, and it turns out to be a blazing hot day, which was, I think, a sign about the future. But as BP, we'd been looking at the data on global warming even then, and it was pretty clear that something was happening which might change the climate of the planet. And while our understanding was primitive, I think we'd figured out that we weren't the first to realize that carbon dioxide produced by burning hydrocarbons was going to be the accelerator of all that. It was, as someone said at the time, the feather you put on a very carefully balanced set of scales. And that's what we thought at the time. And so I got up and said, well, I really think we need to admit where we are and get involved with developing the future and being at the table with people who are going to develop the future, not simply stand apart.
Right.
So I said very simply, the oil and gas industry is contributing is a principal contributor to global warming, climate change, and we need to do something about it. And here's what BP was going to do. And I laid out what I think in retrospect would be regarded as a primitive plan, but one which wasn't bad at the time, with very clear objectives and measures and a capital program to back it up, to go into renewables, into tightening up leaks and various things like that. And so we proceeded. And everyone thought it was inappropriate, except for BP, and except for our board, and except for a few people who'd seen what we were doing. And in particular, our staff really thought it was very appropriate. But the American Petroleum Institute had told me that I'd left the church, and I kept wondering what that meant.
And there seemed to be a huge debate at the time as to whether this was, since you were in America, you were on the offense or on the defense, as they would say.
We were trying to just be on both sides, actually. We were trying to do the right thing and say to the industry, isn't it about time we all did this? Because it was a long time ago. The problem was much smaller than it is today.
Right.
And I hate hypotheticals, but imagine if we'd taken actions then. I think the size of the issue we have to handle today in terms of reducing CO2 would be very, very different.
Right. But you did start a big solar business, or what promised to be a big solar business. I guess the profits were just not the same.
No, they weren't. I mean, again, it was a sort of startup, but at scale.
Right.
And it was literally handmade solar panels. Handmade. And because no one had quite got the tools and technology, and we experimented with different formulations, cadmium telluride, various things like that. And we started a wind business too, with turbines that at that time looked big, but now would be trivial in scale. And we started a carbon trading business, which I think was the antecedent of what we see today. So we did quite a few things like that. And importantly, we understood that to bottle up methane, in particular, this is natural gas, was really very important, because methane, while it may not last forever in the atmosphere, when it's up there for 20 to 40 years, it's it's multiples, it's exponentially bigger impact on the environment than even CO2.
Right. And around about the same time as you were making this speech, you also joined the board of Intel. How did that perspective of big tech influence your thinking?
Well, of course, at that time, again, this was a long time ago, one of the ambitions of Intel was to have 1 billion connected devices around the world. It seems truly absurd today. But it was a very different thought process. The ability to do things that we had not conceived we could do. I started my second job in engineering after some field training. Was someone walked into the office and said, "Does anyone know how to use a computer?" And in those days, that was quite a remarkable thing. And I said, "I do," because I was rather young and didn't fully understand.
So did you when you said that?
Well, actually, I did. At Cambridge, I'd been working with this computer called Titan, and we'd done quite a lot of interesting work and met some interesting people like the late Maurice Wilkes and people like that. And so they said, well, we've got this problem, and would you solve it? And of course, I said absolutely, and it took me about a year to solve and to write a system. But the main point was, whatever I could do was limited by the capacity of the machine and memory, not about what I wanted to do. Nowadays, that flipped a long time ago. So today, and you could see it at Intel, is we were building the innards of bigger and bigger machines. We were experimenting with cheaper and cheaper memory. The combination of the two created something really exciting when it was combined with communications devices, which meant you could string together all these computers, which meant that you had early stage cloud ideas, which meant you could do some really extraordinary things that you couldn't have otherwise thought about. So we were, even at that time at Intel, thinking about, could you apply digitalization to health records,
Right.
and therefore use them for prognosis, for diagnosis and prognosis of health. Could you do that? Could you actually enhance security using different coding devices on the chips that we were producing? So there were a whole lot of different areas that I think
Right.
at that time Intel was going into, which today are still very current.
Yeah, I guess today they're only really coming true now.
Whether it's because of the scale and size of machines and memory. I mean, it's that cloud. It's very crowded out there.
Yeah, quite. And yet,
actually on the ground.
It's interesting. Intel, like BP, still has struggled nonetheless to move away from its core business of selling processors. So I guess that's just a difficult transition to make.
I think it's very difficult, and it tried. There was Intel Venture Capital, Intel Ventures. Some good things, but a lot of misfiring. But it wasn't alone by any means in Silicon Valley with people trying to branch out from where they started, and many people were still in where they started and pretty successful, but not as successful as they might be if they could have done everything.
Hey, John, just to jump in with a question, I think my professor from Harvard Business School, Professor Yaffe, may have been on the Intel board with you. And
he was.
He's a great guy, and he used to always teach us the Intel case, which is they always had something in the drawer that they'd pull out when they needed. And as Patrick was saying, it's not always easy for very large companies to keep innovating, keep changing. And so when you think about this, I'm curious, is that why you're involved with so many startups today? You think a lot of the hope, a lot of the future, when we think about things like climate change, a lot of the solutions will come from startups rather than large companies?
Yes, generally, yes. I mean, I was beginning to think like that when I was on the board of Intel, and I kept seeing, things that could be done by smaller companies that when brought into a bigger company, in theory, could be done better, and there was more growth capital, everything could happen faster, and it didn't happen. People kept tearing things. It's a bit like inspecting plants. If you take them up by the roots too many times and put them back in the ground, they'll die. So too much inspection created the wrong answer. There had to be a balance. So, and in BP, I tried to break the company into smaller bits to get it more effective. It's not the most efficient way, but it's certainly more prone to innovation. And certainly when I left BP for the last 14 years, I've been involved with either private equity or venture capital. Right. And you can see the innovation rate. The rate of innovation is very high. Now, the rate of failure can also be high, but there are people out there who do not feel that they have to conform with past thought, but only with their understanding of the engineering, science, and market. I mean, the failure very often is not fully understanding how to take it to market, to go to market. But on the other hand, the innovation is very high. And the key is how do you capture it and then make it grow really well.
So why do you think big companies don't innovate more than BP's tried, Intel's tried? I mean, and that linear innovation, gradual innovation seems to be fine, but this more disruptive change seems to defeat such companies time and again.
And I think everyone's trying again. I think you have to keep it separate. You really have to have an entirely different set of metrics, a very different type of person as well. And critically, I think people, as you find in the greatest of venture capital organizations, people who understand both the technology and the market and the finance. It's not as if they just throw things across a wall from one person to the next and hope for the best. Large corporations, very often there's too much siloism, specialization, whereas in venture there isn't.
Right.
So I think, for example, my old company BP, when I came back from America at one stage, it was in the throes of undoing a lot of venture that it had done already. And because it had believed that the oil business would be all over in the year 2000 on the Club of Rome forecast, it invested in everything from nutrition. So we were at one stage the biggest sausage maker in Europe, as well as some very advanced computing, which became Psycon, which eventually, I think, went to Capgemini, I'm not sure. And also Mercury Communications, which was the antecedent of cable and wireless. And so a lot of this was all happening inside BP, but it couldn't stay there. And people didn't, the moment it sort of incorporated inside BP, it was antithetical to the core activity.
To the culture, and I guess the governance structures. I should remind people that you were chair of the advisory board of Apex Partners from 2006, 2007. You've worked with Riverstone, running, I think...
And I ran their largest, at the time, the largest renewable energy private equity fund.
Exactly. Yeah, so you have a good perspective on our industry of private equity venture capital as well.
And just to chime in there, because I'm curious about this, The Economist a couple of weeks ago ran an article saying that one of the greatest opportunities was focusing on venture capital, specifically around technologies companies that were trying to address climate change. And I think they made 2 points. One is it's really important for the world, but two, there are also ways to make money. Your thoughts in that space?
Well, they are right. I mean, there are some very great companies, and I've been fortunate to be involved with some of them, who have actually done some, they've been literally startups from an idea through to different rounds of funding to the point of growth, which have done things like, for example, separate out knowledge, information, and control from physical assets needed. The one example I could give is something like ChargePoint in the United States.
Right.
It's separated out the heavy investment in charging and batteries from the actual control system SaaS that they're making all the money with. So there are plenty of things to do, because in the end, I mean, what the objective function of the next phase of energy is zero emissions. It's not to choose which energy it is, but whatever it is, you've got to both get rid of the emissions or offset them with natural solutions. But there's only a limit to what you can offset by natural solutions. And even that requires special control and digitalization. You know, where are these green certificates, things like that.
So let me ask you on that. Do you think then people can still keep producing oil and effectively offset to get to zero?
So they'll only be able to do that so long as they can literally decarbonize the hydrocarbons, which is to say that when it's burnt, you have to capture the carbon dioxide and do something with it, either put it away forever in safe aquifers, saline aquifers, or else, or old oil fields that are absolutely competent, or else you have to be able to use it for something, like make different types of cement and so forth. So I think some of that will be very possible. Carbon capture and storage, CCS, is one of the most important engineering concepts that has to be applied to at least the transition in energy for the next 20 years or so. I just want to remind people that one of the things that people say, well, why don't we just stop the oil and gas industry from producing oil and gas? Indeed, one could do that. The only problem is that 80% of it is not produced by companies, but it's produced by state control in different governments all over the world. So rather more difficult to manage around the world, I would say, than managing a Shell or BP.
That's fair. But do you think carbon capture can really arrive in time, or is it going to be like the cavalry arriving, just too late for Custer?
Well, I think we've left it all a bit too late, really. I wish we'd started 25 years ago. So we really are making up for lost time. I mean, there's a lot of money behind CCS. I think with more investment, with more incentives, and probably if we could have a disincentive of producing carbon into the atmosphere, then it really would move things along. Maybe Europe will do that. I don't think the United States, it depends on the Senate,
Right.
but whoever's in the White House, but the Senate would have to approve of a carbon tax or a carbon something, but incentives are important. Engineering can be done. I mean, this is not, I don't want to underestimate the problem. It's a scaling problem. It's not a discovery or breakthrough problem.
So then a lot of this is about taxation and legislation as well then?
It's about taxation legislation, and it's about drawing in enough capital at an appropriate rate of return for the risk, which actually and that can be adjusted by a taxation policy.
I'm just curious because obviously there's a big cultural shift that comes along with some of this. I mean, for example, the government here in the UK has announced that it's now 2030 that diesel and petrol cars are no longer going to be sold. But you have to get the people to buy in. Do you think everybody's buying into this vision? Or I think we heard from a Professor Gandhi yesterday that there's this issue of the tragedy of the horizons, that people are only thinking a couple of years out. So maybe your reflections on that would be very interesting.
So I do think people are reflecting much more deeply on what are we doing to the world, and in particular, what are we doing to health as a result of what we're doing to the world. And I think COVID-19 has reminded people that nature is a very powerful force, one which is rather more powerful than we are. And if we leave it uncontrolled, it will do things we really don't want. I think it's certainly true to say that the Earth is going to look after itself. She's going to look after herself. Whether we have any space on it as human beings remains to be seen. So we're actually looking after humans by this approach. And I think depending on which generation you're in and which location you're in, I think everyone is moving in a direction saying, we've got to do something about this.
Right.
It's unsightly, it's bad. We want to breathe. We don't want all that plastic in the oceans. We don't want fumes, and we don't want to heat up the world. We don't want to change climates. So we need to do something about it. Now, the question is, how do you phase all that in? So it'll be a multi-speed world, I think, that gets there. Some of these policies, like EVs all new cars to be EVs by 2030, it's probably a good idea, provided that, as always, there's, it's always like a ticket, conditions see over. And I think you've got to see over, we need to have the right charging infrastructure. We need to have stabilized the model type build. We need to get the price down to the right level. It's right now very expensive. And we need to do all of the above, and we need to do it pretty quickly. And when that can be done, well, then it'll be a great solution. It is a good idea, very good idea, but it has to be made practical now.
And if I just summarize for a second, John, I think it sounds like you're a great believer in technology to solve these sorts of problems. It sounds like you're a great believer, actually, legislation to encourage people and force people. It sounds like whilst you've been a great fan of big corporations, you don't really see them leading change.
Well, I see them certainly when they're enabled to continue the change.
Okay.
You need people with big muscles to make big differences in the world.
Okay.
And I do think it's very important that the small goes to big and the changes get there. Let me just say on legislation, I'm very keen on regulation and incentives to reinforce behavior.
Right.
I think that is important because it accelerates everything and it puts the risk in the right place. There are some risks that the private sector simply can't take on. But the risk can be mitigated by taxation, by incentives.
Right.
And then as the risk gets lower, so those things have to change as well. We saw this in renewables, where everybody said, well, renewable energy is just a function of government support. And indeed, at one stage it was, and the support was overdone. And so there was excess profits being generated until people understood that actually you had to move the incentives down as the cost came down.
That's very fair. Of course, to be provocative, I'd have to say that there's at least as much incentive going into North Sea oil production from government, isn't there?
This is also true. It was the single largest block of incentives was for oil and gas globally.
Right. So should that just stop?
Well, I think it should be phased down, but then equally, here's the practical, as everyone knows, the practical problem. These decisions are not made by computers or robots. They're made by politicians who have multiple constituencies.
That's true.
So changing the workforce around is important.
Yes.
Remembering that we still need hydrocarbons. We just need clean hydrocarbons. But we can't let go of hydrocarbons overnight. We need to reinvest more in alternative energies, absolutely. And I include in that nuclear, for example. But also, run-of-the-river hydro, renewables, and, can we find alternative uses of natural gas to make hydrogen before we can actually, at scale, electrolyze water?
Right. And we of course, with the Environmental Technologies Fund, we believe in the power of technology to address a lot of these problems. And we focus very much on young companies who we think will pioneer the solutions. But do you think do you see innovation happening rapidly enough, really, to address the scale of challenge we see?
Well, it's certainly expanded heavily over the last few years. I see a lot of innovation. I think a lot of it is certainly in areas like control systems, optimization, communications, feedback, all in a bundle called AI. But some of it's not actually AI, but let's call it AI. So I think that's important. I think there are going to be more advances in things like electrochemistry and what's happening in battery formulation. There are clearly breakthroughs on solar panels. Can we go beyond normal silicon, etched silicon, to something different, perovskites?
Exactly.
And as for wind turbines, they've just got so big that the efficiency is way up there, and with the right control systems, they don't have to. They're not dangerous to birds and things like this. So there are plenty of things going on, I think, here. And some of them are ready for prime time. I'm very impressed with, what Tesla has done with a very ordinary technology called lithium ion, and is making a very different commercial proposition. And indeed, thinking about how to make it even more different as time goes on.
And John, a related question is there a big opportunity for Europe / the UK to lead in this area? You're looking around the world at opportunities, and how do we stack up?
So it's a tough one to catch up to say we will be the leader. If you take batteries, for example, there is, I think, no doubt that the United States is the leader in these technologies. Because it's been very important for the military effort. And so a lot of money's gone into that. But there are plenty of other things to do. I think I remind people that, manufacturing is very important. Where you can make things for markets are essential. Just stick to our theme of batteries. I think today it's the case that the cells in batteries, about 90% of them are made in China or around China. I think that's probably what you might call a strategic supply chain issue. So you'd want to have localized manufacturing, and you will be able to innovate in the way in which you manufacture, as well as the way you innovate to formulate. So I think there are many areas to do that. I think that the UK could take a lead in that. I worry that it's very important in any nation, as everybody knows on this call, I'm sure, that $1 of government money has to beget at least $2 of industrial money elsewhere for R&D. And that ratio is adverse in the UK. It's 1 to 1.3, been there for a long time. We've got to get that up. Otherwise, the government will simply crowd out the private sector and innovation will not be good. There'll be a lot of cottage industries generated and attempts, but nothing really pulled through. So I think it's a long way of saying we have work to do. We clearly have very good discovery techniques in the UK. We need now to we need to pull them through to a marketable product, and then we need to take the marketable products and pull them back into advances we need to improve them. So there are some areas we can do that in net zero, but not every area.
Now, John, I'm just going to pause for a second to remind our audience that we can see questions if they post them up. We're not going to try and pick off every question, but as they pop up, we'll be aware of them and we'll try and weave some of them into the conversation. But one I do want to pick up is your views on whether you can have an energy industry reliant just on renewables. You know, they're volatile, they're intermittent, they demand a lot of intelligence to be managed. Do you see that as a realistic future?
I think in the very long run, it's a combination of things. I think we need multiple approaches to energy storage, first of all.
Right.
And so, the best thing to do is sometimes to store energy in things that haven't yet released their energy.
Right.
So it's the potential to kinetic issue.
Right.
So I think that we need more breakthroughs in that. Secondly, we need breakthroughs in what can we do to create heat for industrial purposes. To do this through electricity is probably not going to happen. It's like chasing your tail, if you will. So armed with a few things like a lot of renewable power, some more storage, and techniques to keep industry going, you might be able to get quite a long way with.
Okay.
But I think that's why people are very focused on, for example, hydrogen.
Right.
Hydrogen is an ideal, both it's an ideal storage device, but it's also critical for industrial processes. So the question is, can you actually get there? I think not overnight, but you never know. You never know.
So we do actually have a couple of questions on hydrogen and the speed with which we might foresee a hydrogen economy. But you're giving me an impression you think it's important, but perhaps slow.
Well, I think we've got to be careful. It's just a matter of how expensive is it,
right? And
how fast can we get on the learning curve? Is there actually some limit to the learning curve?
Right.
So the ideal is electrolysis. It's ideal high pressure, ultra high pressure. Otherwise, you again chase your tail compressing the hydrogen. And the technologies are not with us at the right level yet. They will be, but you can make hydrogen. Of course, anyone can make hydrogen, from steam reforming. Right. But the problem is you're then left with a lot of CO2 again.
Right.
So I think, the stepwise seems to me the big key to unlock a lot of these gates is carbon capture and storage.
Okay.
Carbon capture and use. If we could make some progress on that, we can make some progress on steam reforming natural gas. Simultaneously, we're making more progress on electrolysis and the production of hydrogen, so-called green. So I think I'm not a great believer in one magic bullet creating everything, but I'm quite in favour of several paths.
Well, let me challenge that, because you from your Intel perspective, you've seen the cost curve of semiconductors, right? And the cost curve of solar is pretty similar, is it not?
It's exactly the same.
So solar is pretty much viable without subsidies in many parts of the world today.
Yep.
And on that cost curve, it's going to be 1/10 of the price in 10 years' time, right? Well, I haven't done my maths right, but roughly.
Yeah. And that's partly because I expect there'll be some technological disruptions,
right,
in the curve, as there always are. And the same is true with hydrogen. It's just if someone said, and today can we do it? The answer is no. But can we do it tomorrow? Almost certainly yes. But I'd like to, someone told me early in my career, never forecast an outcome and a timescale simultaneously. So I think I'd just be cautious about exactly when. And meanwhile, I'd like to make sure we have intermediate technologies before we get an elegant solution at the end.
And John, I'm going to try to relate those comments back to a question we have, which is who's going to pay for all this? As some governments have tremendous debt loads post-COVID. Some industries are literally on their knees. I mean, the airline industry, perhaps the car industry, the energy industry. This is a wonderful vision, but I think there are some concerns in the audience as to whether we can afford it.
So I've been trained in economics by my very old friend Mervyn King, who used to run the Bank of England. And I think, not to corrupt what Mervyn says, is remember that the debts we take on about COVID are similar to war debts, and that we are trying to preserve things for the future by paying for them today. And we can cure these debts in a very different way through normal growth. The question is, what's the normal growth and who pays for it? Well, I think part of it is going to be the change in the economy, the so-called green economy, and some of it will be paid for by us, and some of it will be paid for. It'll be paid for by us. It'll be a redistribution, but it will be paid for by us. But part of it, but of course, through growth. And so I think it will generate a different form of economy, different jobs, different taxation, different revenues. But in the end, for some things, we're probably not paying enough. It's a good thing I'm not a politician. But actually, we all have to pay for carbon we're putting in the atmosphere, which is spoiling our future. Now, if you can't afford to pay, then those who can afford to pay will have to pay a bit more. And those who can't pay, we cannot have regressive approaches to this. And I think you saw that even in the debate in Washington about the carbon tax. This was Hank Paulson and others saying, really, we should tax carbon, and then the money should be redistributed to the nation, avoiding any form of regressive effects. So I think there are various things to think about, but in the end, this has to be paid for. Some will be paid for itself. Some will have to be paid for to start it off by the status quo.
And listening to you, this sounds like big money, big problems, and yet time and again you return to small companies, and you're putting a lot of your own time into artificial intelligence companies. Now, perhaps you could touch on, why is that then?
Well, because I think that's the source of ideas, practical ideas. I mean, a lot of people have ideas, they're fantastic things, but practical, implementable ideas come from companies that are going to succeed. And they're very important things, whether it is the ability to measure, for example, I come back to this point that our objective function is to reduce emissions. So therefore, we need to measure emissions. We need to make sure we understand where they are so we can do something about it. How do you do that? You have to do it you can't measure it directly. You've got to measure a lot of this indirectly. So it's imagery, it's processing uncertain data, for example. Secondly, it's always very good to use less energy, whatever energy it is. And so getting really predictive maintenance, getting an understanding of how to shut and open things as you need them rather than have things on constant up is very, very important indeed. Optimizations are really important, and we can do a lot of that now. So I just picked these two things, processing images and optimization. are things that really will enormously change the amount of carbon that we'll put in the atmosphere.
Okay, so to you, being involved with data companies is not a nice to have then. For some people, when we talk to people about ourselves funding innovation, they say that's nice, but the technology is going to be small beer. You really ought to just be deploying solar or something like that. But
no, I probably am. Maybe, to make an enormous amount of money, I expect I should really be in the consumer AI type activity. But this is really industrial.
Right.
It really is. It's about industrial processes, which are the big levers. These are the huge levers because they also change the way in which things are provided to the consumer. You can present it more effectively, then consumers will probably buy it more effectively. So that's where I'm very focused in this area. I happen to have some investments in consumer activity as well, but the bulk of it is in very much in the industrial space. I'm very excited by that. I think there are plenty of areas to go.
John, I'm watching the questions, and I'm dying to ask you this one. You used to run a crown jewel of the UK, and there is obviously you've had a wonderful experience with Intel. Now we're watching ARM being put into play. And so what do you think? How do you even begin to reflect on that? A nice little startup went to have tremendous success, and now somebody wants to buy it.
Well, I like to think that, you have to start in the scientific way. You could prevent people buying. You could shut the market down very easily, and you could simply say, no, people can't buy British companies. That's not, I think, what we want. We have a reputation as a nation of being open for trade. But I do think that there are some strategic things that need a review. After all, the US has been at that for some time with the investment reviews, as indeed have people like Canada, Australia, and so forth. So we should, I think, join the club of having strategic investment reviews to see whether people can buy these things or can invest in certain areas where we feel it may not be appropriate for them to invest. So I think that's important, but it should be used very sparingly. Because in the end, the way to keep a company in a country is to make the country the most attractive place for investors and the location of the activity. And I think we've got to do more to make that the case. I just think the UK has not attended to that for some time. We should be, we should be a great place to invest in and a great place to invest from, both. And we've really got to do that. I noticed with the big AI companies, I think, and I've just forgotten the names of them, I think we lost 4 in a row to the United States. The last one, I think, being DeepMind. So, we need to just understand what we're doing here and learn lessons from that. I'd like to see more people investing here. I think we do need a better attitude to growth capital, early stage growth capital. I think that requires a change in culture. And for my taste, I think it's about people appreciating what you might call both sides of the house there, the technology and the business and the finance, and not sort of throwing things across walls to each other. I like to think that a more integrated approach would actually produce a better result.
And so are you fundamentally optimistic that we can manage this transition?
Oh, yes, I am. I'm always optimistic, of course. I'm a businessman, and if you're not optimistic as a businessman, then you have to be, obviously, feet on the ground. But in the end, you've got to say, we've got to drive to an end here. How do we do this? And I think the bigger, the less time, the faster we'll respond now. I do think that there's a big change. I think that investors want to change. I keep looking at this index over the last 5 years of oil and gas companies versus alternative energy companies. The gap's now 180% in favor of alternative energies. which says something, I think, in the way in which investors are thinking, and certainly generations of people really want to be in the business of doing something different when it comes to power in the world. And I agree with them. I think it's actually quite difficult now, for example, to get people to join the boards of oil and gas companies.
John, I would just say the only person more optimistic than a businessman is probably a venture capitalist in the sustainability space.
The one area I just want to ask you about before we summarize with your final thoughts is you're a big fan of carbon capture and storage, and I think it sounds great, but I'm a bit cynical that it's going to be there in time, as I said. Do you think encouraging investment in that will actually be I worry it will be a distraction and a disincentive for government when there are other more compelling technologies that ought to be focused on?
Well, look, I think there are several compelling technologies, and I wouldn't want to pick one and say put everything on red and go for it. You can't do that. But I think the way to do carbon capture and storage, we have to handle this question of penalties for emissions of carbon. That's what I think is the important thing to do. Penalties or incentives, one or the other, or a combination of two. And then we need to draw money in from the private sector to do this. I think there's every possibility. I think the UK is beginning to do this with the invention of new industrial parks, which include this and other manufacturing capability. That's a good idea. More of it is needed.
Okay, and so I want to give you a final platform to offer a bit of advice. You just said that you shouldn't make a prediction that was effectively precise and time-bounded. So let's take the time away for a minute. But you're speaking to a group of investors or people interested in investment here. What's your advice as to what they should be doing here? This is an incredibly confusing subject.
Well, I do think, well, it depends, if I may. I really do think that there is a role for impact investing here. I know it sometimes has a bad name and sometimes a good name, but there are some things that need investment which probably have a slightly more purpose than profit, but still have profit, which is very important. So I also think that we have to remember that the provision of energy and the elimination of waste combined would be absolutely the world's largest business. It's huge. So there are bits of this which really are important and will grow. The available market is enormous. Whether that is new approaches to what we do with waste, often called sustainability or circular economy, but plastics, of course, is the thing that will sound like The Graduate, but it's plastics that is a big problem, and how you reprocess this. There's a lot of work there, whether it's energy itself, whether it's the control systems that control our daily lives. All of this adds to how do we actually sustain the planet and get down to zero carbon.
Thank you. Thank you, John. And I'm going to attempt to very briefly summarize now because our time is basically up. I've really enjoyed this. It's my simple summary, and I really appreciate your candor. I hope our audience do too. I thought actually we should be disagreeing on a lot of things, but we're the Environmental Technologies Fund. We focus on sustainability through innovation, but actually I find you also very focused on sustainability through innovation. And I think that's kind of wonderful, actually. So thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Sustainability Talks podcast. To find out more or join as a guest, head over to the ETF Partners website at www.etfpartners.capital. You can also connect with us on LinkedIn or follow us on Medium at ETF Partners. So until next time, thanks for listening.